Murder in the Snowman building contest. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Velvet Clues. I'm Connor, your narrator for tonight's chilling tale. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you something. Do you remember your first snowman? Was it a crooked fellow with mismatched buttons, or perhaps a majestic creation that stood proudly until the thaw? Share your winter memories in the comments below. I always enjoy reading about those moments of innocent joy that make winter special. Now, pour yourself something warm, settle into your favourite chair, and let me tell you about the day St Mary Mead's beloved Snowman contest became the scene of something far more sinister. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, observing the remarkable transformation that had overtaken St Mary Mead overnight. 18 inches of pristine snow had fallen, the most substantial accumulation the village had witnessed in nearly 2 decades. The morning sun cast diamonds across the unmarred white expanse, creating a scene of such perfection that even the most cynical observer would have paused to admire it. Chapter 1. A Winter Morning's Deadly Touch. The village green, normally a modest patch of grass where children played and elderly residents took their constitutionals, had become an Arctic canvas awaiting the day's festivities. The annual Snowman building contest, scheduled to commence at 10 o'clock, had attracted unprecedented interest this year, thanks largely to the generous sponsorship of Mr. Gerald Blackwood. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles as she watched the early arrivals claiming their designated spaces on the green. 30 families had registered for the competition, each allocated a generous plot marked by small flags bearing numbers. The pristine snowfield showed no disturbance save for the organisers' initial marking paths, creating distinct boundaries between each family's workspace. Gerald Blackwood himself stood near the judges' pavilion, a temporary structure erected specifically for the occasion. Even from her window, Miss Marple could observe his characteristic swagger as he surveyed his domain. The man had donated £5,000 in prize money, divided among categories for creativity, size, and traditional design. Such generosity from Blackwood was unusual enough to warrant attention, for the wealthy financier was better known for extracting money from the village than contributing to it. As Miss Marple prepared to venture out, wrapping herself in her warmest coat and selecting her sturdiest boots, she reflected on the curious nature of human behaviour. A snowman contest should represent the epitome of innocent pleasure, families working together to create whimsical figures from frozen water and imagination. Yet something about the morning's atmosphere suggested an undercurrent of tension beneath the festive surface. The Fletcher family had arrived early to claim position 17, their children bouncing with excitement as they unloaded their supplies. Catherine Fletcher directed operations with military precision, arranging carrots, cold pieces, scarves, and an impressive top hat that had apparently belonged to her late grandfather. Young Timothy Fletcher was already rolling the base of what promised to be an ambitious creation. Dorothy Mills, the contest organiser, bustled about with clipboard in hand, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. She'd organised this event for 15 years, but never with such elaborate prizes or such intense interest. Miss Marple noted how Dorothy's smile seemed forced when she spoke with Blackwood, her body language suggesting someone performing a required duty rather than enjoying a pleasant interaction. Thomas Reed, serving as safety coordinator, was methodically checking the depth and stability of the snow, ensuring no hidden hazards lurked beneath the white blanket. His construction experience made him the natural choice for such responsibilities, though Miss Marple observed how his jaw tightened whenever Blackwood passed nearby. Sarah Hayes moved through the gathering crowd with her camera, documenting the preparations with professional efficiency. She'd been hired to photograph the event for the local newspaper, but her lens seemed to linger on Blackwood more often than on the emerging snowmen. Harold Price, Blackwood's perpetual shadow, carried scorecards and timing sheets, his 20 years of service evident in how he anticipated his employer's needs before they were voiced. Yet today, There was something different about Price's demeanour, a subtle shift that Miss Marple's experienced eye detected immediately. As 10 o'clock approached and the contest officially began, the village green erupted into organised chaos. Children shrieked with delight as they rolled enormous snowballs, parents offered guidance and assistance, and the morning air filled with laughter and good-natured competition. Miss Marple positioned herself where she could observe both the contestants and the pristine snow paths between the building sites. In her experience, the most revealing evidence often appeared in the spaces between the obvious action, in the moments when people believed themselves unobserved. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the innocent snow waited to record whatever drama would unfold before the day's end. Chapter 2. The contest begins in earnest. The village green had transformed into a hive of creative energy by 10:30. Miss Marple, having secured an excellent vantage point near the refreshment tent, observed the 30 families labouring over their frozen creations with varying degrees of skill and enthusiasm. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows that would prove significant before the day was through. The Fletcher family's snowman was taking impressive shape under Catherine's determined direction. She'd assigned specific tasks to each family member with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. Her husband rolled the middle section, while their daughter Emma carefully shaped the head. Young Timothy had been relegated to gathering additional snow for detailing work, a task he performed with diminishing enthusiasm as other children's laughter echoed across the green. Gerald Blackwood made his first formal circuit of the contestants at 11 o'clock, pausing at each station to offer what he undoubtedly considered encouraging remarks. Miss Marple noted how conversations died as he approached, resuming only after he'd moved on. His presence cast a peculiar chill that had nothing to do with the December temperature. Dorothy Mills accompanied Blackwood on his rounds, her clipboard clutched like a shield. She had organised contests for years without incident, but this year's elevated stakes had introduced an element of pressure that showed in the tight lines around her mouth. When Blackwood paused to criticise the placement of family number 12's snowman, claiming it encroached on neighbouring space, Dorothy's knuckles whitened on her pen. Thomas Reed had completed his safety inspection and now assisted struggling families with structural engineering advice. His expertise proved invaluable to the Weatherby family, whose ambitious 10-foot snowman had begun listing dangerously. As he worked, Miss Marple observed him stealing glances at Blackwood, each look carrying years of accumulated resentment. Sarah Hayes moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, her camera capturing candid moments of family cooperation and childhood joy. Yet her lens repeatedly returned to Blackwood, documenting his interactions with an intensity that suggested more than professional interest. When he paused near the Fletcher's snowman, she took multiple shots from various angles, as though studying him through her viewfinder. At 11:30, Harold Price announced a brief refreshment break, though most families continued working, unwilling to lose momentum. Price distributed hot chocolate to the children with unexpected gentleness, a side of him rarely visible when performing his duties as Blackwood's assistant. Miss Marple accepted a cup of tea from him, noting the tremor in his hands that he quickly suppressed. The Fletcher snowman had developed into something quite remarkable by noon. Catherine had crafted delicate details using kitchen implements brought specifically for the purpose, creating texture in the snow that suggested clothing. The children had contributed their own creative touches, with Emma fashioning snow buttons with mathematical precision, while Timothy gave their creation an unusually expressive face using carefully selected pieces of coal. It was precisely at noon when Catherine Fletcher inserted the carrot nose, a particularly fine specimen she'd selected from her kitchen garden and kept frozen specifically for this purpose. She positioned it with artistic precision, stepping back to evaluate the effect before making minor adjustments. The orange nose gave their snowman a distinguished profile that set it apart from its neighbours. Miss Marple observed this moment with particular attention, though she couldn't have said why it seemed significant. Perhaps it was the way Catherine's expression shifted from satisfaction to something more complex as she regarded her handiwork. Or perhaps it was how Sarah Hayes immediately photographed the nose installation, her camera clicking rapidly as though documenting evidence. The contest intensity increased as the deadline approached. Families who'd started confidently now showed signs of panic as time shortened. The Hampstead family's snowman had suffered a catastrophic collapse, sending their youngest into tears. The Davidsons had run out of decorating materials and were frantically borrowing from neighbours. Even the steadiest participants showed stress as Blackwood made another circuit, this time taking notes that would influence his final judgment. At 12:30, Miss Marple noticed the first deviation from the established pattern. Catherine Fletcher announced she needed additional decorations from her car, leaving her family to continue without her supervision. Her departure created a gap in the Fletcher family's attention, their focus entirely on perfecting the snowman's surface texture. Almost simultaneously, Dorothy Mills excused herself to check refreshment supplies, though the volunteers seemed to have everything well in hand. Thomas Reed began another snow inspection, this time focusing on the far side of the green where fewer families were working. Sarah Hayes mentioned needing better angles and disappeared behind the row of snowmen. Harold Price walked toward the parking area, claiming he needed to retrieve the official scoring sheets from Blackwood's vehicle. For approximately 30 minutes, the contest continued with these 5 individuals pursuing their stated purposes, while the pristine snow around each construction site waited to record any unusual activity. Chapter 3. Footprints in Virgin Snow. The period between 12:30 and 1 o'clock would later prove crucial to understanding the day's tragic events. Miss Marple, maintaining her position near the refreshment tent, observed the various comings and goings with the careful attention of someone who understood that ordinary moments often concealed extraordinary significance. The virgin snow surrounding each family's designated area served as an unintentional recording medium, preserving every movement in crystalline detail. The main paths between construction sites showed heavy traffic as families visited neighbours to admire progress or borrow materials. But the areas behind each snowman remained largely undisturbed, marked only by the original builder's footprints. Catherine Fletcher's absence stretched longer than might be expected for simply retrieving decorations. Her family continued working, but their coordination suffered without her directing presence. Timothy had begun adding unnecessary embellishments to the snowman's base, while Emma fretted about the angle of the top hat. Their father seemed distracted, frequently glancing toward the parking area as though wondering what delayed his wife. Dorothy Mills had indeed gone to the refreshment tent, but her inspection lasted mere minutes before she departed again, heading toward the contest's periphery. The volunteers later reported that she'd seemed agitated, checking supplies that clearly needed no attention and asking questions about matters already resolved. Her usual organizational efficiency had given way to nervous energy that required constant movement. Thomas Reed's safety inspection followed a peculiar pattern. Rather than systematically checking each area, he moved in seemingly random fashion, sometimes doubling back on his own path. His circuitous route took him behind several snowmen, including number 17, where he paused for several moments, apparently examining the snow's stability, though no construction work was occurring there. Sarah Hayes's photographic expedition produced interesting results. She'd claimed to need better angles, yet many of her shots from this period showed empty snowfields or distant figures, rather than the detailed contest documentation her employer expected. Her path through the construction sites seemed designed to avoid direct observation, while maintaining plausible reasons for her presence anywhere on the green. Harold Price's journey to retrieve scoring sheets should have required 5 minutes at most, yet he remained absent for nearly 20, returning with papers that had apparently been available in the judge's pavilion all along. His shoes showed evidence of extended walking through deep snow, the white residue reaching higher on his trouser legs than a simple trip to the parking area would produce. At 12:45, something significant occurred near Snowman 17, though no one reported witnessing it directly. The snow behind the Fletcher construction showed fresh footprints approaching from an unexpected angle, circling around neighbouring snowmen to approach from the rear. These tracks showed someone had stood directly behind the snowman for approximately 2 minutes, weight shifting from foot to foot as recorded in the snow's compression patterns. Miss Marple would later photograph these prints, noting their depth indicated someone of average weight, moving carefully to minimise noise. The person had approached along a path that avoided direct sight lines from the main contest area, using other snowmen as visual barriers. Most significantly, the footprints showed a deliberate return along the exact same path, suggesting someone retracing their steps to avoid creating additional evidence. The footprint pattern revealed something else of interest. At the point where the person had stood behind Snowman 17, the snow showed signs of careful work. Small indentations suggested someone had knelt or leaned close to the snowman's head level, and there were sweep marks as though something had been brushed or smoothed to conceal disturbance. When Catherine Fletcher returned at 12:55, she carried a small bag of additional decorations that hardly seemed worth the lengthy retrieval time. She immediately noticed something about their snowman, pausing to examine the carrot nose with a puzzled expression. When asked later, she would report that it seemed to be positioned slightly differently than she remembered, though she attributed this to her imagination, or perhaps her husband's adjustments. The final hour of construction passed in a frenzy of last-minute improvements. Families abandoned ambitious plans in favour of achievable goals. The competitive atmosphere intensified as Blackwood began his final preparation for judging, arranging his scoring sheets with the theatrical importance of someone preparing to render ultimate judgment. As 2 o'clock approached, the 30 snowmen stood complete, ranging from charmingly amateur to surprisingly sophisticated. The Fletcher's entry number 17 had evolved into an elegant creation with personality and presence that set it apart from its neighbours. The carrot nose, now firmly frozen in place, gave their snowman a distinguished air that would surely catch any judge's attention. Miss Marple observed the gathering crowd of contestants and spectators, noting the various tensions that competed with excitement as judgment approached. The footprints behind Snowman 17 remained visible but unnoticed, their significance yet to be discovered. Chapter 4. The Judge's Final Touch. At precisely 1:30, Gerald Blackwood began his official judging circuit. He changed into what he considered appropriate attire for photography, an expensive overcoat that emphasized his prosperity. Harold Price followed with the scoring sheets, maintaining a careful distance that spoke of years of learned deference. The contestants gathered in anxious clusters, children hushed by parents who understood that thousands of pounds hung in the balance. Blackwood approached his task with theatrical solemnity, examining each snowman from multiple angles while making notes that he shielded from curious eyes. He had developed a routine over his years of judging various village competitions, a performance designed to emphasize his importance as the final arbiter of success or failure. At the Thompson family's snowman, he adjusted a wayward scarf, explaining loudly that proper presentation was essential for the photographs that would appear in the regional newspaper. At the Morrisons' creation, he repositioned a stick arm that had begun to droop, declaring that structural integrity reflected moral character. Each interaction was designed to demonstrate his authority, while subtly diminishing the creator's achievements. Sarah Hayes followed Blackwood's progress with her camera, documenting each judgment for posterity. Her professional demeanour had returned, though Miss Marple noticed she maintained unusual distance from her subject, using her telephoto lens rather than approaching for close shots. When Blackwood paused to deliver particularly cutting criticism, Her finger hesitated on the shutter as though reluctant to preserve his cruelty. The crowd followed Blackwood's progression with varying degrees of anticipation and dread. Dorothy Mills stood near the judge's pavilion, her organizational duties complete, but her tension undiminished. She twisted her wedding ring unconsciously, a gesture Miss Marple recognized as belonging to someone confronting painful memories. Thomas Reed had positioned himself where he could observe without participating, his expression carefully neutral despite the way his hands clenched, when Blackwood dismissed the Hartford family's snowman as peasant work. The Hartford children looked crushed by the harsh assessment, their morning's joy evaporating under Blackwood's withering critique. At 1:25, Blackwood reached the Fletcher family's snowman. Number 17 stood proudly among its neighbours. The family gathered anxiously as the judge circled their creation. Blackwood's expression showed grudging approval as he examined the detailed work, the careful proportions, and the artistic touches that elevated it beyond mere snow sculpture. Catherine Fletcher watched with particular intensity as Blackwood leaned close to examine their snowman's face. Her earlier puzzlement about the carrot nose had apparently been forgotten in the tension of judgment. Her children pressed close to her sides, feeling the weight of the moment even if they didn't fully understand its implications. Blackwood reached out to touch the carrot nose, explaining to his gathering audience that proper attachment was crucial for structural integrity. His fingers grasped the orange vegetable, adjusting its angle slightly for what he declared would be the perfect photograph. The moment his skin made full contact with the frozen carrot, his expression changed from pompous authority to sudden confusion. He withdrew his hand, staring at his fingers with bewilderment. A strange tingling sensation spread from his fingertips up his arm, followed immediately by numbness that seemed to race through his nervous system. His scoring sheets fell from Harold Price's hands as Blackwood staggered, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. Dr. Haydock, who'd been enjoying the contest as a spectator, pushed through the crowd as Blackwood collapsed onto the snow. His professional instincts took over immediately, checking for pulse and respiration while calling for space and assistance. But even his experienced hands could do nothing against the rapid progression of the neurotoxin that had entered Blackwood's system through the simple act of touching a carrot. Within 3 minutes, Gerald Blackwood's breathing had become laboured and erratic. His pupils dilated dramatically as his nervous system shut down with frightening efficiency. Dr. Haydock worked frantically, attempting CPR even as he recognized the symptoms of acute poisoning, unlike anything he'd encountered in general practice. At 4 minutes, Blackwood's heart stuttered and stopped. The village green, moments before filled with anticipation and competitive excitement, fell into shocked silence, broken only by children's confused questions and their parents' hushed attempts at explanation. Miss Marple observed the scene with the detached clarity that came from years of encountering death in unexpected places. She noted who stepped forward to help and who retreated. She observed who showed genuine shock and who displayed something more complex. Most importantly, she studied the carrot nose that had been Blackwood's final touch, now innocent-looking in the snowman's face, yet somehow deadly enough to kill a man in minutes. The transformation of the festive scene into a crime scene began immediately as someone thought to call the police, though the damage to evidence had already begun. Chapter 5. Inspector Slack takes command. Inspector Slack arrived within 15 minutes of the emergency call, his official presence transforming the village green from a scene of communal shock into a formal crime scene. Police constables began establishing barriers, while Slack himself went directly to Dr. Haydock, who was covering Blackwood's body with a borrowed blanket. The doctor's assessment was grim and puzzling in equal measure. Death had occurred from what appeared to be acute neurotoxin poisoning, absorbed through the skin of Blackwood's hand. The rapid progression suggested something extraordinarily potent, beyond anything typically encountered in rural Somerset. Haydock had preserved Blackwood's hand in a plastic bag, noting a slight residue that might prove significant for laboratory analysis. Inspector Slack immediately focused on the Fletcher family's Snowman, ordering everyone to maintain distance from all the snow sculptures until they could be properly examined. The carrot nose that had been Blackwood's final touch remained in place, appearing utterly ordinary despite its lethal nature. Catherine Fletcher stood with her family, her face pale with shock and confusion. When Slack questioned her about the carrot, she insisted it had come from her own kitchen garden, stored in her freezer specifically for the contest. She'd handled it herself when inserting it into the Snowman at noon, suffering no ill effects whatsoever. The inspector's investigation revealed a disturbing fact that would prove crucial to solving the case. The carrot currently serving as the Snowman's nose showed signs of having been handled twice. The insertion point in the snow showed disturbance, suggesting removal and replacement, though the Fletcher family swore they hadn't touched it after the initial installation. Miss Marple quietly drew Slack's attention to the footprints she'd observed behind Snowman 17. The inspector, though often dismissive of elderly ladies' observations, had learned through painful experience to take Miss Marple's insights seriously. Together, they examined the track patterns preserved in the snow, noting the deliberate approach and retreat of someone who'd spent approximately 2 minutes at the Snowman between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. The laboratory analysis, expedited due to the case's severity, revealed the presence of dimethyl sulfoxide mixed with tetrodotoxin on the carrot's surface. The DMSO served as a carrier, allowing the deadly pufferfish poison to penetrate skin on contact. The combination was sophisticated, requiring specific knowledge of both chemistry and toxicology to prepare and apply effectively. Slack's investigation into who had left the main contest area during the crucial 30-minute window produced 5 names. Each person had provided explanations for their absence, but the footprint evidence suggested one of them had approached Snowman 17 with deadly intent. The challenge lay in determining which of the 5 had both motive and means to commit such an elaborate murder. Dorothy Mills admitted under questioning that Blackwood had destroyed her late husband through predatory lending practices. Her husband's suicide 3 years earlier had left her with debts that consumed her modest inheritance. She'd organised today's contest only because Blackwood had insisted, using his financial leverage over village events to ensure compliance. Thomas Reed's story proved equally compelling. His construction company had been thriving until Blackwood had bribed officials to award a major contract to his own shell company. The loss had forced Reed to lay off workers who'd been like family, destroying relationships and reputation he'd spent decades building. Sarah Hayes initially resisted discussing her connection to Blackwood, but eventually revealed that her brother had been imprisoned for fraud that Blackwood had actually committed. Her brother had served 8 years for crimes he didn't commit, losing everything in the process. His suicide 2 years after release had destroyed what remained of Sarah's family. Harold Price's motive emerged more slowly. After 20 years of faithful service, he'd discovered Blackwood was planning to dismiss him without pension or severance, having hidden assets to avoid legal obligations. Price faced destitution in his advancing years, betrayed by the man he'd served loyally despite witnessing countless cruelties. Catherine Fletcher's connection to Blackwood proved most direct. Her family's farm had been foreclosed through fraudulent means, with Blackwood falsifying payment records to claim default. He'd then purchased the property at auction for a fraction of its value, forcing the Fletcher family into a cramped village cottage while he left their ancestral land undeveloped. Each suspect had compelling reasons to want Blackwood dead, and each had opportunity during the crucial window. But as Miss Marple studied the evidence, she focused on a different question entirely. Who among them would have access to tetrodotoxin and the knowledge to prepare such a sophisticated poison delivery system? The answer to that question would prove more revealing than all the footprints in the snow. Chapter 6: A Photographer's Hidden Past. Miss Marple sat in the police station's consultation room, studying the photographs Sarah Hayes had taken during the contest. The images revealed more than their creator might have intended, particularly those captured during the crucial period between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. While claiming to seek better angles, Hayes had actually photographed very little of artistic merit during her absence from the main viewing area. Inspector Slack had ordered background investigations on all 5 suspects, but Miss Marple had particularly requested information about Sarah Hayes's professional history. What emerged surprised everyone who knew her simply as a local photographer. Before her career change 5 years ago, Sarah Hayes had been Dr. Sarah Hayes, a marine biologist specializing in toxic organisms at Plymouth Marine Laboratory. Her doctoral thesis had focused on tetrodotoxin-producing bacteria in pufferfish, examining the symbiotic relationship between host and toxin-producing organisms. She'd published papers on the poison's molecular structure and its potential medical applications, research that required extensive handling of both living and preserved specimens. Her laboratory had maintained colonies of toxic pufferfish for study, preserved in special solutions that maintained toxin potency for years. The career change from scientist to photographer had seemed abrupt to her colleagues. She'd claimed burnout from academic pressure, but the timing coincided with her brother's imprisonment for Blackwood's crimes. She'd moved to St. Mary Mead shortly after, establishing herself as a wedding and event photographer, her scientific past unknown to most villagers. When confronted with this information, Hayes initially maintained her innocence. She admitted to knowing about tetrodotoxin, but denied having access to it anymore. However, a warrant to search her cottage revealed a very different story. What appeared to be a photographer's darkroom actually contained equipment far more sophisticated than developing pictures required. Behind a false panel in her refrigerator, investigators discovered sealed containers labeled with scientific precision. Several contained preserved pufferfish organs suspended in formaldehyde solution. Others held extracted toxin in concentrated form, enough to kill dozens of people if properly administered. A laboratory notebook, hidden among photography manuals, documented experiments in creating stable toxin solutions using DMSO as a carrier. The notebook's entries dated back 3 years, beginning shortly after her brother's suicide. The meticulous records showed someone systematically working toward a specific goal, testing different concentrations, carrier solutions, and application methods. One entry, dated 6 weeks before the contest, described successfully creating a solution that would remain stable when frozen, perfect for application to a root vegetable like a carrot. Hayes had tested her poison on laboratory mice, carefully documenting absorption rates and lethal doses. She'd discovered that freezing actually helped preserve the toxin's potency, while making it less likely to evaporate or degrade. The DMSO carrier would penetrate winter gloves, making protection difficult unless someone knew to wear specific chemical-resistant materials. Her photography equipment included macro lenses that she'd used to document the poison's crystalline structure when dried on various surfaces. She'd experimented with different vegetables, finding that carrot's porous surface held the solution ideally, while appearing unchanged to casual observation. The orange colour masked any slight discoloration the dried poison might cause. The preparation method she'd developed was ingenious. She would coat a carrot with the DMSO tetrodotoxin solution, allow it to dry, then freeze it solid. The frozen carrot would appear completely normal, but would deliver a lethal dose to anyone handling it with bare skin or regular gloves. The cold would initially numb any tingling sensation, delaying awareness of exposure until absorption was complete. Miss Marple studied the evidence with professional interest tinged with sadness. Here was someone who'd channeled genuine scientific brilliance into an elaborate murder plot. The knowledge that could have contributed to medical advancement had instead been perverted into an instrument of revenge. When presented with the overwhelming evidence, Hayes's composure finally cracked. She sat in the interrogation room, her photographer's confident persona dissolving into the grief-stricken sister who'd spent years planning revenge. The story she told revealed the true depth of Blackwood's cruelty and the desperate lengths to which it had driven her. Her brother James had been a promising accountant working for Blackwood's company. When Blackwood's fraudulent schemes began unraveling, he'd needed someone to blame. James had been perfectly positioned as the scapegoat, with Blackwood fabricating evidence that pointed to his employee rather than himself. The trial had been swift, the evidence seemingly overwhelming, and James had been sentenced to 8 years in prison. The truth about Blackwood's crimes had emerged gradually, but by then James was already broken. Prison had destroyed his gentle nature, his wife had divorced him, his children were strangers, and his professional reputation was irreparably ruined. His suicide note had asked Sarah's forgiveness for not being stronger, for letting Blackwood win. Sarah had read that note countless times, each reading strengthening her resolve to ensure Blackwood faced justice of a different kind. Chapter 7. The Perfect Winter Crime. Sarah Hayes sat across from Inspector Slack and Miss Marple, her confession pouring out with the exhausted relief of someone who'd carried a terrible secret for too long. The elaborate plan she described revealed months of careful preparation, waiting for exactly the right opportunity to execute a murder that might have gone undetected, if not for Miss Marple's keen observation. The Snowman contest had presented ideal conditions Hayes had only dared hope for. The unprecedented snowfall had guaranteed high participation, while Blackwood's generous prize money ensured he would personally judge the entries. His habitual need to touch and adjust things for photographs was well known, making it nearly certain he would handle the snowmen during judging. Hayes had prepared multiple poisoned carrots weeks in advance, storing them in clearly labelled containers in her freezer. She'd tested the stability of the toxin under freezing conditions, confirming that cold temperatures actually helped preserve its potency. The DMSO carrier remained effective even when frozen, ensuring skin absorption would occur regardless of temperature. On the morning of the contest, she'd brought 3 poisoned carrots concealed in her camera bag, each wrapped in chemical-resistant material to prevent accidental exposure. She'd waited patiently for the right opportunity, knowing that families would be focused on their creations rather than watching for intruders. The Fletcher family's snowman had been perfect for several reasons. Their position at number 17 placed them away from the main concentration of contestants, with natural sight barriers created by neighbouring snowmen. The family's intense focus on their work, combined with Catherine's known perfectionism, meant they would be absorbed in details rather than watching their perimeter. Most importantly, Hayes knew about the Fletcher family's grievance against Blackwood. If the murder was discovered, they would be natural suspects given their recent loss of the family farm. Hayes had felt guilty about potentially implicating innocent people, but rationalised that the Fletchers would ultimately be cleared by lack of evidence. When Catherine Fletcher left to get additional decorations, Hayes had seen her opportunity. She'd announced her need for better photography angles, then circled behind the snowmen using a route she'd mentally mapped earlier. The deep snow muffled her footsteps, while her white winter clothing helped her blend into the background. Approaching Snowman 17 from behind, she'd quickly removed the innocent carrot nose and replaced it with one of her poisoned versions. The exchange took less than 30 seconds, her practiced hands working efficiently despite heavy gloves. She'd smoothed the snow around the insertion point to hide any disturbance, then retreated along her exact approach path to minimize footprint evidence. The innocent carrot went into a sealed bag in her pocket, later disposed of in a waste bin near the parking area where it would never be connected to the crime. She'd then resumed taking photographs, creating an alibi through time-stamped images that showed her working at various locations around the green. Hayes had calculated that even if the poisoning was discovered, the investigation would initially focus on the Fletcher family as the snowman's builders. The complexity of the poison would eventually point towards someone with scientific knowledge. but she'd hidden her background so thoroughly that she wouldn't be an obvious suspect. Her visible photography work during the contest would seem to eliminate her from consideration. What she hadn't anticipated was Miss Marple's presence and her attention to the footprint patterns in the snow. Those telltale tracks preserved in the pristine white surface had provided a timeline that contradicted Hayes's claimed movements. Combined with the laboratory analysis revealing the sophisticated nature of the poison, they'd pointed towards someone with both opportunity and specialized knowledge. The confession revealed additional details that horrified even experienced investigators. Hayes had actually prepared for multiple scenarios, bringing different poisons that could be administered through various methods. If the carrot nose plan had failed, she'd been prepared to poison Blackwood's celebratory champagne, or contaminate his judging pen with a contact toxin. She'd studied Blackwood's habits for months, documenting his routines, preferences, and vulnerabilities. She knew he was severely allergic to bee stings and had considered releasing trained wasps during the contest. She discovered his heart medication and had contemplated replacing his pills with identical-looking tablets containing deadly nightshade extract. The tetrodotoxin plan had appealed to her scientific sensibilities. It was elegant, unusual, and virtually untraceable without sophisticated analysis. The poison would cause rapid paralysis and death while leaving minimal forensic evidence. If Blackwood had been alone when he touched the carrot, his death might have been attributed to a heart attack or stroke. Miss Marple listened to this recitation with deep sadness. Here was someone whose intelligence and training could have contributed so much to society. Yet grief and injustice had twisted those gifts into instruments of murder. The elaborate nature of the crime reflected not just Hayes's capabilities, but the depth of pain that had driven her to such extremes. Chapter 8. Science Perverted to Vengeance. The full scope of Sarah Hayes's preparations emerged as investigators processed evidence from her cottage laboratory. What they discovered revealed years of methodical planning that had transformed legitimate scientific knowledge into a precisely calibrated murder weapon. Hayes's laboratory notebooks contained detailed records of every experiment, written in the precise language of academic research. She'd maintained the scientific rigor of her training even while planning murder, documenting failed attempts and successful modifications with equal thoroughness. The notebooks read like a doctoral thesis on applied toxicology, complete with chemical formulas, dosage calculations, and absorption rate tables. She'd obtained her pufferfish specimens through legitimate scientific suppliers, using her old credentials and claiming to be conducting independent research on tetrodotoxin's pharmaceutical applications. The suppliers had no reason to question orders from a published researcher with an established publication record. She'd maintained proper documentation for all purchases, creating a paper trail that appeared completely legitimate. The extraction process she'd developed was remarkably sophisticated. Using equipment purchased second-hand from university surplus sales, she'd created a functional chemistry laboratory in what appeared to be a photographer's storage room. She'd extracted tetrodotoxin from pufferfish organs using methanol solution, then purified it through column chromatography to achieve pharmaceutical-grade concentration. Her experiments with DMSO as a carrier had been particularly ingenious. She'd discovered that mixing tetrodotoxin with dimethyl sulfoxide created a solution that would penetrate skin within seconds, carrying the poison directly into the bloodstream. The mixture remained stable when frozen, actually becoming more concentrated as water crystallized out of the solution. Temperature had been a crucial factor in her planning. She'd tested how long the poisoned carrot would remain lethal under various weather conditions. Cold temperatures were ideal, preventing evaporation while maintaining the poison's molecular structure. She'd calculated that a carrot treated with her solution would remain deadly for at least 6 hours in freezing conditions. The choice of tetrodotoxin itself revealed careful consideration. Unlike common poisons that might be detected through smell or taste, tetrodotoxin was odorless and wouldn't cause immediate irritation. The victim would feel only mild tingling initially, easily dismissed as cold-induced numbness. By the time serious symptoms appeared, the poison would have spread throughout the nervous system. Hayes had even researched antidotes, though she knew none would be available quickly enough in rural Somerset. She documented that only immediate access to mechanical ventilation and intensive care might save someone exposed to the dose she'd prepared. The village's distance from major medical facilities made survival virtually impossible once exposure occurred. Her notebooks included profiles of potential victims beyond Blackwood. She'd researched the judge who'd sentenced her brother, the prosecutors who'd pursued the case, and the witnesses who'd testified against him. Each profile included vulnerabilities, habits, and potential elimination methods. Blackwood had simply been the most accessible target, his judgment of the Snowman contest providing a perfect opportunity. The psychological transformation recorded in her notebooks was perhaps most disturbing. Early entries showed genuine scientific curiosity about tetrodotoxin's properties. Gradually, the focus shifted from understanding to application. The woman who'd once written about poison's potential medical benefits had begun documenting its efficiency as a murder weapon. Miss Marple studied photographs of Hayes's laboratory with particular interest. Everything was meticulously organized and labeled, revealing someone who maintained control even while planning chaos. The juxtaposition of photography equipment and chemistry apparatus created a surreal tableau. Two careers merged into an instrument of revenge. Inspector Slack struggled to understand how someone could maintain such elaborate deception for years. Hayes had continued her photography business, attending weddings and celebrations while secretly preparing murder. She'd smiled at village events, chatted pleasantly with neighbours, all while her home contained enough poison to eliminate dozens of people. When questioned about this double life, Hayes showed no remorse about the deception itself. She explained that maintaining normalcy had been essential to her plan. Any unusual behaviour might have drawn attention, potentially disrupting years of preparation. The photography career had provided income and social camouflage while she pursued her true purpose. The investigation revealed that Hayes had come remarkably close to perfect crime. Without Miss Marple's observation of the footprints and insistence on examining everyone's background thoroughly, the poisoning might have been attributed to accidental contamination or even natural causes. The sophisticated nature of the poison and its delivery method had nearly exceeded local investigative capabilities. As evidence mounted, the full tragedy of the situation became apparent. A brilliant scientist had perverted her knowledge into a weapon of revenge, destroying not just her victim, but ultimately herself. Chapter 9. Winter's innocent joy corrupted. The aftermath of Sarah Hayes's confession sent shockwaves through St. Mary Mead that extended far beyond the immediate tragedy. The Snowman contest, which had represented one of the village's most cherished winter traditions, had been transformed into something sinister that would forever taint future celebrations. Miss Marple found herself in the unusual position of comforting the Fletcher family, who struggled to comprehend how their innocent snowman had become an instrument of murder. Catherine Fletcher was particularly distraught, knowing that she'd handled the original carrot without harm, while Blackwood had died from touching its replacement. The children, mercifully, understood only that something bad had happened during what should have been a joyful day. The 30 snowmen still stood on the village green, though police tape now surrounded them like a bright yellow reminder of innocence lost. Parents hurried their children past what had been sources of pride, and several families requested permission to destroy their creations rather than let them stand as monuments to murder. Dorothy Mills faced the difficult decision of whether future contests should continue. The event she'd organised for 15 years had been irreversibly tainted, yet cancelling it would grant Blackwood's death a victory over community spirit. She spent hours in discussion with village council members, trying to find a path forward that honoured tradition while acknowledging tragedy. Thomas Reed found himself in an unexpected position. His construction company, nearly destroyed by Blackwood's corruption, suddenly had opportunities as Blackwood's various schemes unravelled. Yet he took no satisfaction in this reversal of fortune, understanding that it had come at too high a price. He quietly hired several workers he'd been forced to dismiss, rebuilding not just his business, but relationships Blackwood had severed. Harold Price faced a different kind of reckoning. 20 years of enabling Blackwood's cruelty weighed on him as investigators uncovered the full extent of his late employer's crimes. While legally innocent of wrongdoing, Price struggled with moral culpability for the countless times he'd remained silent while Blackwood destroyed lives. The investigation into Blackwood's business dealings revealed a pattern of exploitation extending far beyond the 5 suspects in the murder case. Dozens of families had suffered from his predatory practices, each story adding another layer to understanding why someone had finally taken deadly action against him. Sarah Hayes, awaiting trial in custody, showed a complex mixture of emotions. She expressed no remorse for killing Blackwood, but deep regret for corrupting the Snowman contest. In a letter to the village council, she apologized for transforming a celebration of winter joy into a crime scene, acknowledging that innocent families had been forced to witness death during what should have been a magical afternoon. Her scientific colleagues struggled to reconcile the brilliant researcher they'd known with the calculating murderer she'd become. Several wrote character references describing her early career's promise, the innovative research that might have led to medical breakthroughs. They painted a picture of someone whose gifts had been perverted by grief and injustice into instruments of revenge. The pufferfish poison she'd used became a subject of morbid fascination. Newspapers published sensationalized accounts of tetrodotoxin's lethal properties, its presence in Japanese fugu cuisine, and the sophisticated knowledge required to extract and weaponize it. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead found itself at the center of what journalists called the most scientifically complex murder of the decade. Miss Marple reflected on how the pure white snow had served as both canvas and witness to the crime. The footprints that had revealed Hayes's approach to the Snowman represented a kind of poetic justice, nature itself recording the evidence that would expose her elaborate plan. The same pristine conditions that had made the contest possible had also preserved the crucial evidence. The village children, resilient as always, began to recover first. Within days they were building new snowmen in their gardens, their natural joy reasserting itself despite adult anxieties. Their creations were smaller, private celebrations rather than public competitions, but they represented hope that innocence could survive even proximity to evil. Local schools struggled with how to address the incident. Teachers found themselves explaining death and murder to children who'd witnessed Blackwood's collapse, trying to preserve childhood innocence while acknowledging harsh realities. Several brought in counselors to help students process their experiences, particularly those whose families had been directly involved in the contest. The snowman that had been the murder weapon stood longest of all, preserved as evidence until the investigation concluded. Number 17 had become infamous, photographed from every angle, analysed and documented until every snowflake had been catalogued. When finally destroyed, Catherine Fletcher insisted on being present, needing to see the innocent snow return to the ground. Chapter 10. Miss Marple's Final Observations. As February arrived and the last traces of snow melted from St. Mary Mead's village green, Miss Marple sat in her parlour contemplating the case that had transformed a winter celebration into a scene of carefully orchestrated murder. Inspector Slack had visited that morning to inform her that Sarah Hayes had pleaded guilty to murder, accepting a life sentence rather than forcing a trial that would have further traumatized the community. The complete picture of the crime revealed layers of tragedy extending far beyond the immediate events. Hayes's brother James had been buried in a pauper's grave after his suicide, unable to afford better. after Blackwood's destruction of his life. Sarah had spent her small inheritance on a proper headstone, the cost forcing her to sell her research equipment and abandon any hope of returning to science. The tetrodotoxin she'd synthesized had been destroyed under careful supervision, the deadly poison neutralized and disposed of according to strict protocols. Her laboratory notebooks were sealed as evidence, their brilliant insights into toxicology forever tainted by their murderous application. The scientific community mourned the loss of a researcher whose early work had shown genuine promise for medical applications of marine toxins. The Fletcher family had decided to leave St. Mary Mead, the association with the murder proving too difficult to overcome despite their innocence. Catherine Fletcher had told Miss Marple that she could never look at a carrot again without remembering that moment when Blackwood touched the poisoned vegetable and began to die. Their children had nightmares about snowmen coming to life with evil intent. Dorothy Mills had announced that future snowman contests would include a memorial moment for all victims of violence, transforming the event from simple celebration into something more complex but perhaps more meaningful. She'd established new rules requiring all decorative materials to be provided by organizers rather than brought by participants, a security measure that acknowledged how innocence had been exploited. Thomas Reed had discovered documents in Blackwood's papers that revealed the full extent of corruption involved in stealing his contracts. He'd provided this evidence to authorities, leading to several arrests among local officials who'd accepted bribes. His construction company was slowly recovering, though he took no joy in profiting from Blackwood's death. Harold Price had surprised everyone by using his knowledge of Blackwood's victims to establish a fund for those harmed by predatory lending. He contributed his entire savings, saying it was partial recompense for years of silent complicity. He'd taken a job as a clerk in a charity shop, seeking redemption through service to others. The murder weapon itself, a simple carrot transformed into a deadly trap through scientific knowledge, had entered criminal history as one of the most unusual poisoning methods ever documented. Forensic science journals published papers on the case, analyzing how DMSO and tetrodotoxin had been combined to create a contact poison that could penetrate skin in seconds. Miss Marple had been asked to lecture at the police college about her observation of the footprints, the crucial evidence that had broken the case open. She'd declined, preferring to let Inspector Slack take credit for investigative work that had ultimately exposed Hayes's elaborate plan. Her role in solving the case remained known only to a few. The psychological profile of Sarah Hayes that emerged from investigation revealed someone whose grief had crystallized into cold determination. She'd spent 3 years planning murder with the same methodical approach she'd once applied to scientific research. Every variable had been considered, every contingency planned for, except for an elderly lady's habit of observing details others overlooked. The village green itself had been restored to its normal appearance, the evidence of 30 snowmen and 1 murder erased by time and weather. Children played there again, though parents watched more carefully than before. The innocent trust that had characterized village life had been damaged, perhaps permanently, by the revelation that murder could hide behind the most wholesome activities. Miss Marple understood that the case represented something deeper than simple revenge. It demonstrated how grief and injustice could corrupt even brilliant minds, transforming gifts meant for humanity's benefit into weapons of destruction. Sarah Hayes had possessed everything needed for a meaningful life: intelligence, education, purpose, yet had sacrificed it all for revenge that brought no peace. The snowman building contest would continue, Dorothy Mills had decided, because surrendering to fear meant letting darkness win. But it would be different now, marked by awareness that human creativity could serve either joy or death. The innocent pleasure of rolling snow into spheres and decorating them with vegetables would forever carry in shadow of that December day when a carrot nose became a murder weapon. In her final notes on the case, Miss Marple wrote that the true tragedy lay not in Blackwood's death, which few mourned, but in the corruption of winter joy, the destruction of Sarah Hayes's brilliant mind, and the shattering of a community's innocent pleasures. The pristine snow that had made the contest possible had recorded not just footprints, but the death of innocence itself, preserving in frozen crystal the moment when celebration became crime.